welcome to a very special Fridays Live. It is the coronation tomorrow, so we've got a very royal themed Facebook Fridays Live for you today. So let us know where you're joining in from. I can already see we've got Ellen from sunny Roscoe in Illinois. Rose is tuning in from a rainy, chilly Massachusetts. We've got the lovely Ellie in the comments today. Ellie did a fantastic session yesterday with Kate, the fashion historian. So if you haven't watched that yet, do go back and watch it, about the people who dressed the Queen and royalty. A fascinating session there. So let's see who's joining us. Say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. I can see Kim from a rainy West Yorkshire, Matthew from Watford, Andrew, Sarah tuning in from Wexford there, Janet from North Wales. It's really good to see you all today. I thought we were going to start out with sunshine. I got caught in a rainstorm earlier, so I was desperately trying to make sure my hair was okay for this very special Fridays Live. So today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the history of the coronation service. So we're going to be going back to the medieval times and coming right up to the modern day. We're also going to be taking a look at our wonderful new records of the week and seeing who else we've got tuning in. We've got Victoria and Daphne. Victoria's had a thunderstorm in Suffolk, lashing rain and hail. I think we had very heavy rain, didn't stick around for the hail. Got Gina and Jenny. Hello, everyone. And Karen, yes, do catch Ellie's session. It really was an excellent one. The clouds in South London. No, it really can't decide. And with the coronation tomorrow, I mean, the last time I checked the forecast, it was raining, and that's what they call king's weather because he rains. Terrible joke. Anyway, let's dive in. We've got some very exciting new records this week. Before we get on to matters coronation-wise, and these, and I am very excited. I am very excited. To introduce these new records of the week. And actually, I've just seen a comment from Kim here. Take this down for a second. I have an ancestral link with William Sancroft, who crowned James II. So this reminds me of our question of the week, which I should have introduced earlier. My apologies. I'm just too excited by the records of the week and the coronation tomorrow. So our question of the week is going to be, do you have any royal or famous connections in your family tree? So the question of the week, again, once more, is do you have any royal or famous connections in your tree? So we'd love to hear, and we'll come back and look at your answers once we've had a look at the new records of the week. And Ellie's kindly posted a link for them there. Okay, so the reason why I am so excited by these new records of the week are that they are Sussex records. And I was born and I grew up in Sussex. And we've got new Sussex baptisms, marriages and burials. And as a Sussex native, this makes me very, very happy. So I don't actually have any Sussex ancestors. I was born and raised in the county, so it's just lovely to see these joining the site. And we've also got 3 fab newspapers for you this week too. Without any further ado, let's dive into our Sussex records. And we begin with our Sussex baptisms, which span the years 1502 to 1922. A big chunk of history there. And it's a chunky edition this week for you. It's over 300,000 new records from East and West Sussex. So historically, the county just sort of was by itself. Sussex, nowadays, it's split into 2. And they span, these baptism records span the 242 different parishes across both East and West Sussex. And there's a nice little illustration there of one of the parishes, and this is the parish of Fittleworth in the west of the county. And this is an illustration from the West Sussex Gazette from the 1950s. And Sumu, the best of us are born in Sussex. My father's branch goes back to 1880. Amazing. And this record set, this covers that time. So maybe Sue, you'll be able to find your father's branch there. And Matthew too, showing for the Sussex ancestors, both East and West. So here's an example of our new baptism records. This set is index only, but it's a really thorough index, as you can see from this transcription. And this is the baptism record of Sarah Tribe, who was baptised on the 13th of August, 1731 in Tillington. I picked Tillington, that's my connection to West Sussex. I lived there for 5 or so years, and my dad was actually vicar of Tillington. So I'd like to imagine that sometime in the future we'll see baptism records for those people who he baptised appear. And we can see that this is a detailed transcription that we've got here. We can see that Sarah's father is William Tribe. And there are some lambs here pictured in the field near Tillington, and that's also from our wonderful newspaper collection. So next up, we have marriages. And these span the years 1504 to 1937. And we've got nearly 2,000, not nearly 2,000 at all, we've got over 260,000 new records from East and West Sussex, from 251 different parishes. And I was just looking through our newspapers to look at some Sussex weddings, and I found this lovely montage of some East Sussex wedding groups from 1930 from the Sussex Agricultural Express. So you kind of do see more photographs of weddings being included in newspapers from this time onwards. So sort of from the 1920s, you're seeing more and more, in the 1930s, and ramps up more and more. So it's always good to consult the newspapers just to see if there's a photograph of your ancestors' wedding. So yeah, some lovely happy couples there. And these new editions are really historic, going back to 1504. And as you know me, I like to dive back as far as I possibly can, back in time as far as I possibly can. And so this particular marriage is from 1548 in the parish of Fittleworth. And Fittleworth is also very near where I grew up. And my parents still live in that area. And this marriage would have been conducted at the parish church of St Mary's, a lovely old church. And when I think of St Mary's, I think of the lovely yew tree that grows outside. And the same yew tree probably would have been there in 1548 when Robert Langley, who is listed here, married the wonderfully named Jane Shaw Crasser. Wonderful name there, unusual. So this was 1548. This was 10 years before Queen Elizabeth I came to the throne. And actually there's a nice bit of Sussex folklore around Queen Elizabeth I. It is said, and Fittleworth, it is said that when Queen Elizabeth was travelling from the great house of Cowdray across to Parham, her horse threw a shoe. So she stopped off at a blacksmith just outside of Fittleworth in a little hamlet, and had her horse reshoed. And this blacksmith still stands to this day. And whether it's true or not, I don't know. But I like to think that if it was true, perhaps Robert and Jane might have witnessed Elizabeth I's progress through the Sussex countryside. And finally, now two burials. These predate the marriage and baptism records by several hundred years. We're going all the way back to 1274 for these, and then we're going all the way up to 1996. So we've got over 200,000 new records this week, again from East and West Sussex, from 247 different parishes, including the parish of Portborough, which you can see illustrated here. This is from the Illustrated London News from August 1865. So it's a wonderfully old drawing, and again, just worth browsing our newspapers to find these pictures and illustrations of old landmarks. I just love, you can just make out the ladies in their full 1860s costume going to visit the church. And here's an example of one of the burial records. And again, it's index only, but the transcription gives us a lot of detail. Now, this is the burial record for one Elizabeth Simmons. So she was buried on the 17th of May, 1735 in Fittleworth. And we can also see got a really nice nugget of extra information here that her father was a William Simmons. Now, I picked out this particular burial record because there is a story behind it. Quite a bloody story. In Sussex in 1735, there was a particularly brutal murder. It was committed by a man named John Weeks. He was a highwayman, thief, a general rogue and ne'er-do-well. Now, his victim was a woman named Elizabeth Simmons, and she was killed in a hamlet just outside of Fittleworth. Now, I believe this record here is the record of Elizabeth Simmons, poor murder victim. The date and the name, the place fits. Fittleworth would have been her nearest church, so it makes sense. But the reason why this story stands out is that it doesn't quite end with Elizabeth's death and John Weeks getting caught. When John Weeks was caught, he refused to testify. So he didn't plead or say anything. And back in 1735, this led to quite an unusual and archaic punishment, which is called peine forte et dure. So what this basically involved is quite nasty. You would lie down and you'd have weights put on top of you, piled and piled and piled until you passed away. And despite this awful punishment, John refused to speak. I mean, and there is speculation about why he refused to testify. Perhaps it was malice. There might have been a mistaken belief that he thought that if he didn't testify, then his family might have been able to inherit some of his wealth, if he had any wealth. We don't know. And the story goes that in order to finish John off, the rather large jailer actually got on top of all the weights, and that ended John's life. So it's a particularly infamous case, as I believe it's the second to last example of peine forte et dure being used as punishment in this country, and that took place in Horsham. So a nice bit of Sussex folklore there. Okay, let's move on from the morbidness. You can see Linda and Andrea joining. Welcome, welcome. We're just on to newspapers. There we go. And we've got two from Wiltshire this week and one from Scotland. And our Scottish ones had a lot of love over on Twitter. I've just been seeing people being very glad to see Scotland represented this week. But we'll start in Wiltshire with the Devizes and Wilts Advertiser. And this was founded in 1858 and it dubbed itself as a cheap weekly newspaper. So what I really love about the first editions of newspapers, they're just so worth a read. The first editorial will lay out the ambitions and the aims of the newspaper. So it's really interesting to sort of see how maybe political alliances and opinions might have changed over the years. And they're always quite, these Victorian ones are written in quite flowery language, and the Devizes and Wilts Advertiser is no different. And it proclaims, let the talkers of society talk, let the querulous quarrel, let the politicians and theologians dispute. We go upon a different path, that of setting to work to supply the public with a really good and useful publication at the lowest possible price. So yes, it would have been very cheap. It was 1 penny. So this was just after the newspaper tax was revoked, meaning that newspapers could sell at a much cheaper rate than before, of typically around the penny mark. And our other new Wiltshire title of the week is the Marlborough Times, and or to give it its full title, the Marlborough Times and Wilts and Berks County Paper. So this was circulated in Wiltshire, Berkshire and Hampshire from 1859 onwards. And again, it's got a lovely introduction in its first ever edition, and it promised that it would not contain angry and prejudiced ebullitions of party strife, but a faithful record of such occurrences in the town and neighbourhood, or in the more distant parts of the kingdom, as may deserve publicity or tend to stimulate or warn its readers. And finally, we have our new Scottish paper, the Campbelltown Courier, which was founded in the Argyll and Bute town of Campbelltown in 1873, a place famed for its whisky, or so I'm told. So that's a really robust local paper. It's filling 8 pages, and it's still in print to this day. And I can see we've got some answers to our question of the week coming through, which is, do you have any royal or famous connections in your family tree? So let's have a look. I'm gonna do a disclaimer here. I don't have any. I haven't been able to track down any. And as for famous, tenuous. Let's have a look. Okay, Victoria, I'm going to start. I've got Victoria here, and she's related through marriage to the Bland family. John High Lord Bland was a royal sword cutler and belt maker to George III. I love that. That's amazing. Yeah, this was a book that was mentioned yesterday in the royal clothes special about those who served Queen Victoria. I think it's called Serving Victoria. Just so interested in those people who were in service to the monarchy. So that's a great one there. And we've got Ellen. Through 8th great grandparents Dorothy Park, Lieutenant Joseph Morgan, Princess Diana Spencer is my 9th cousin. Oh wow, that's amazing. Lady Di there. And we've got Kim. Just discovered a second cousin of my maternal great-grandmother who was named Reginald Hanson. In 1886, he was elected Lord Mayor of London, during which time Queen Victoria celebrated her Jubilee year. He entertained the Queen the following year at Mansion House. Oh, wow. That's a great one. And yes, Jubilee year, Queen Victoria herself, I wonder if she was amused. Well, that is a misnomer. We know that she often was amused. And Jane, it's got a coronation theme here. The only royal link I know is that my great uncle Stanley was a chorister at the coronation of King George and Queen Mary in 1911. I love that, and I love how that's been a memory that's been preserved from that time. That's very special. Joe, King Charles III, the man of the moment, is my 18th cousin. Oof. Our shared ancestors are Richard, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville. I'm descended from their daughter Anne and Charles from her younger brother, Edward IV. Wow, that's a wonderful one there. It's all great. Karen. Apparently, I'm 14th cousin to Diana, Princess of Wales. So, of course, also William and Harry, and George and Charlotte and Louis as well. Not a proved connection yet. Okay, to let us know when it's been proved, Karen. We'd love to hear. Jenny. According to one particular website, I have lots of royals in my family tree, but I cannot find any proof of that gateway ancestor that everyone seems to have connected to my fishing families is actually the right person. I don't believe it for a moment. Wow, you never know. And I think I saw a comment just down here. Statistically, yes, Matthew saying here, statistically you do have a royal link somewhere. It's just a case of finding the gateway, and that is, we probably, those of us with ancestry stretching all the way back, we're sure to. I mean, because the amount of people get smaller and smaller and smaller. So again, as Matthew says, statistically it is likely to have that connection, but just finding it. And how many brick walls could we break down to find that royal ancestor lurking behind a brick wall? I mean, that's always my dream, that I'll break down a brick wall and I'll find someone incredibly rich and famous and dazzling. We live in hope. I'll just see if there's any more coming through. And I was actually quick to write off my royal connections, but my grandfather met the Queen Mother, I believe, and she was very lovely. So that I do have a connection there. Kim, I have an ancestral link with William Sancroft, who crowned James II. We will be talking about James II later. I actually have a depiction of his coronation. So maybe that includes your ancestor there, Kim. And oh, thank you, Victoria, for the lipstick. It is a Maybelline. I will come back to you on the exact brand, but it is wonderful because it stays on all day. And let's see if we've got any more coming through. And Lynn says, I have no royals. I have labourers, farmers, miners, butchers, teachers, drapers, leather workers, tailors. And those are wonderful. And, you know, usually we're celebrating those workers, our ancestors who worked hard for a living, and that is not to neglect their wonderful legacy too. So yeah, you know me, I'm always sort of looking at the ordinary lives of our ancestors, but with the coronation, and I just explore some of our more extraordinary ancestors. But no, oh, wonderful. Okay, and oh, Kim, come back. Probably applied to with tea and coffee, as that was a family business. He created red, white, and blue double crown coffee. Oh, how lovely. Beautiful. Okay. So thank you for sharing your royal and famous connections. And I'm just going to delve now into the history of the coronation itself. And as we'll see, our contemporary coverage of the coronation ceremony stretches back all the way to the crowning of King George I back in 1714. So we actually have a contemporary account of that coronation service in 1714. And we can also use our newspapers to go back further into the history of the service as well, and trace its origins all the way back to the days of the Saxons. So to discover more about this eminently historic ceremony. And we see Shirley over on YouTube. She met the Queen Mother when she was at school in 1958. Oh, that's wonderful. So I think we'll just say, you know, there are lots of varying opinions about the coronation, but I think what will be in evidence tomorrow is its incredibly long history, a history that stretches back over 1,000 years. So that's what we're going to have a look at today. And what I'd really like to draw your attention to today are the wonderful coronation specials that were published around the coronation of King Edward VII onwards. So that's from 1902 onwards. And publications like the Illustrated London News, the Sphere, the Sketch, these wonderful illustrated titles published these coronation specials, like this one here from June 1902, which I just think is glorious. The colours, the reds, the golds, is just lavish. But this is a sort of a trick one here, because Edward VII was due to be crowned in June 1902, but he didn't actually end up being crowned until August, and that was because he'd come down with appendicitis and had to have an operation. So just a quick one, and how do you find these coronation titles? So what I recommend doing is searching for the term coronation in our newspaper search, and then filtering by publication. Illustrated London News is a particular recommendation from me, and then filtering by the year and then the month of the coronation. But this particular publication of the Illustrated London News was hiding in plain sight because the history books have the coronation as August 1902. This edition was published in advance of the cancelled ceremony back in June. So I feel like I was quite lucky to find this one. And it contains some really gorgeous illustrations. And I just love the sort of the medieval revival feel here, sort of tied with that arts and craftsy movement. And we see in lovely Technicolor some representations of the coronations of Edward the Confessor, Edward I, and Edward II. And actually, this wonderful coronation special depicts all the coronations, basically, from their earliest inception in Saxon times all the way through to Queen Victoria in June 1838. And these two images here show imagined scenes from the coronations from many, many hundreds of years ago. So on the left there, you've got Saxon King Edward the Elder, and on the right, we've got Edward the Martyr. And a good point to mention here that the traditional site of coronations wasn't always Westminster Abbey, where King Charles will be crowned tomorrow. It was actually Kingston upon Thames, which is historically part of Surrey. And there was actually a stone in Kingston on which 7 Saxon kings were crowned. And it really makes sense when you say it out loud, doesn't it? Kingston, yeah, you get it. And the actual blueprint of the coronation ceremony dates back to 973 AD, and the crowning of King Edgar in Bath. And his coronation was drawn up by the then Archbishop of Canterbury, Dunstan, who was canonised in 1029 to become St Dunstan. Of course, I see some more questions of the week coming through, so I will just pause slightly. And we've got Jean, how from my maternal side, Edward Domville, born 1577, died 1639 at Limb Hall, Cheshire. Oh, he married Eleanor Leicester, his children born during James and Charles I's reign. That's amazing to go that far back. That's wonderfully historic there. I wonder all those momentous moments in history they would have witnessed. And some more Bev, some royal employees, 7 times and 6 times great-grandfathers Thomas and Daniel Graham were royal apothecaries of the person of Kings George I, II and III. Wonderful claim to fame there, Bev. And oh, Janet, this is really special. My late mother made a scrapbook of newspaper cuttings relating to the coronation of George VI. It was a bit tatty, but I've now donated it to the local Homefront Museum after having photographed every page. Oh, that's really wonderful. So special to have that kind of memento. And yeah, I mean, do let us know how you celebrated, or your ancestors celebrated coronations past, and that is a wonderful example. Okay, so now the first coronation to take place in Westminster Abbey was that of William I, or William the Conqueror, and he was the first king of the House of Normandy to rule over England. But it was actually Edward the Confessor who ordered the building of Westminster Abbey in order to fulfil a vow to St. Peter. And did you know that Westminster Abbey was one of the earliest English churches to be built in the shape of the cross? And it was completed on Christmas Day in 1065, but just a few days later it hosted the funeral service of Edward the Confessor. Edward was succeeded by his half-brother Harold, and then the infamous events of 1066 led to William I seizing power after the Battle of Hastings. Now, William decided to host his coronation in Edward the Confessor's legacy, his masterpiece, Westminster Abbey. Now, this was either a sort of a dose of arrogance on the part of the conqueror, or perhaps he was paying homage to the late king. Now, we learned from our newspapers, and there's some wonderful accounts, that all did not go as planned during William the Conqueror's coronation ceremony. And I've just pulled out a little extract there. And this was authored by Carolyn Scott in the 1970s for the Illustrated London News. Now, what happened was, during the ceremony, when the Bishop Godfrey, asked the Normans in French and the Saxons in English if they would receive William as their king, cheers broke out. It's good. But the soldiers waiting outside mistook these cheers for shouts of alarm. So they reacted in, the way that soldiers react, by setting the nearby houses on fire. And they ran into the abbey, the swords in the air, the smoke swirling around them. You can imagine the scene of chaos, of confusion, as the soldiers expected to confront a rebellion. there was no rebellion, and the panic died down. Soldiers left the abbey, and William I was crowned king, with few of the congregation remaining. But as you can see, this representation of the coronation, which I love, this was published by the Illustrated London News in the run-up to the coronation in 1953. This picture shows little evidence of the riot and fire which followed the Norman Guards misunderstanding the tumultuous acclaim of the congregation during that ceremony of recognition. So the ceremony of recognition is when the congregation is asked, will they accept the king or queen? And as we see with William I's decision to be crowned at Westminster Abbey, this would set a precedent for the location of the coronation ceremony. But I think also it reflects how the coronation became very much a reflection of the incoming monarch's personality. And that's sort of what we see throughout history. And we can see tomorrow that the coronation ceremony is going to be trimmed back, reflecting Charles III's opinions on a more sort of streamlined monarchy. So I've just picked out some instances from across the years of coronation services reflecting the personality of the monarch, or some of their own sort of hang-ups, as it were. So when Queen Mary was about to be crowned in 1553, she feared that the holy oil used for anointing in the coronation ceremony had lost its power, thanks to the Reformation. And a few years later, in 1559, her younger half-sister, Queen Elizabeth I, was bothered by the odour of the oil. She did not like that. And she also abolished the elevation of the host during the coronation mass. So we see that the coronation ceremony became more Protestant from that time onwards. And you can see a depiction here of the crowning of Elizabeth I from that Illustrated London News special from 1902. I'm going to post-Civil War, the restored King Charles II had a very profligate and cavalier coronation in 1661. So that was quite in keeping with his sort of merry monarch persona. And his brother too, James II, who didn't prove to be greatly popular, had a lavish coronation banquet with an array of exotic foods on offer. And here's a depiction of his coronation there with his consort, Queen Mary of Modena. And the House of Stuart wasn't destined to reign much longer. And this brings me to our first contemporary account in our newspapers, in our newspaper archive of a coronation. And I was really excited to come across this. And you can just see the historic nature of this text. I sort of love the bit that, the reproduction is slightly faded. It just adds that extra level of almost authenticity to it. And you can see that the long S is being used, and that deliciously intricate illustration there at the beginning of the text. I love it. Okay, so this coronation, the first coronation to be described by our newspapers, is the coronation of George I. So this marked the beginning of the Georgian era, and it's quite it's quite remarkable that George came to be crowned, really, and this was because Queen Anne, the last of the Stuarts, she had many children. Sadly, they did not survive infancy. So British Parliament, English Parliament, searched high and low to find the right candidate to succeed. So they had to fill several criteria. One of them being the main one being they had to be Protestant, and they actually settled on Electress Sophia of Hanover. And I think they'd gone through hundreds of people by this point. And her mother was Elizabeth Stuart, and she was a daughter of James I of England. So there was the connection. And the Empress Sophia was in her 80s at the time that she was named heir presumptive. And sadly, she died only a few months before Queen Anne died. So we could have had a Queen Sophia being crowned in 1714 if she'd lived a little bit longer. But as it happened, it was her son, George, who succeeded to the throne. Back to the contemporary account now, which was printed in the Stamford Mercury on the 28th of October 1714. So this was 8 days after the coronation had taken place. And it begins with the following line: "Yesterday was performed the ceremony of the coronation of His Most Excellent Majesty King George." And it was quite a long day for the new monarch. He spoke no English, and meaning that the ceremony had to be conducted in Latin. So according to the newspaper, he arrived at Westminster Abbey between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. in the morning. And the service was a very long one. I don't think our new monarch would approve. He did not leave till about 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And then he attended the traditional banquet at Westminster Hall. But there's something else about this report that really caught my eye. So we've got this narration of the coronation. We've got all the names of all the people who were there. But then, and this is what I found really interesting about this, is how the coronation affected the lives of ordinary people back in 1714. And so the continuation on the piece of the coronation reads, during the procession, several unfortunate accidents happened by the fall of 2 scaffolds, one in the old palace yard and another in the broad sanctuary. So when I initially read this, when I think about scaffolds, I tend to think of going to the scaffold, execution style. But this relates to the structure that people would have been stood upon to watch the coronation. So members of the coronation back in 1714, members of the crowd, the public, general public who've just gone to watch, actually ended up getting injured, and tragically, in some instances, they lost their lives. And this newspaper, the Stamford Mercury, true to newspapers of the day and the centuries following, relates all the details, warts and all, in a sort of robustly matter-of-fact way. And it's worth reading out as part of this account. And it says the following persons were killed and wounded, viz. The Lady Burton in St. Germain Street, having but 6 weeks to go with child, that fell from the scaffold in the broad sanctuary and died in 2 or 3 minutes. At the same time, Mrs. Hansel, a midwife, and her daughter Anne Hansel were dangerously wounded, the first having broken her back and the last her thigh. A servant maid of Mr. Stoughton, the apothecary in Southwark, was also mortally bruised and died as soon as brought home. Justin Farmer, an old grey-headed fellow that sold cakes there, was also killed, as was one Thomas Laycock, a poor boy of about 12 years of age, that was of the same employ. Mr. Tyndall, an apothecary in Bridger Street, had likewise a son killed, and his wife's leg broke by the fall. And so it goes on. There are sadly more victims here. And what I wanted to do after reading this was to find a record in one of our parish registers that could, I suppose, corroborate the story. Could we find someone in our parish records who's mentioned in this newspaper report, and enter our wonderful Westminster Burials collection? Now, this is the transcript for the burial record for James Tyndall. You might remember that the account mentions a Mr. Tyndall, who was an apothecary in Bridger Street. He had his son killed and his wife's legs broken. And looking at the date of burial here, it's the 23rd of October, 1714. The coronation was the 20th, so 3 days after. So this could be Mr. Tyndall's son. Then there's the location, and this made it more persuasive for me. The church is, the burial place is St. Paul in Covent Garden, and I looked up Bridger Street. It still exists, and guess where it is? It's in Covent Garden. So this is very possibly and very sadly the burial record of one of those who so tragically lost their lives that day, the day of George I's coronation. So I'm going to skip over the next couple of Georges to the coronation of George IV. And this one was not without controversy. So he barred his wife, Queen Caroline, from attending the ceremony. Indeed, he delayed the coronation because he was desperate to get a divorce from her. And this didn't happen, so he issued instructions for her to be barred from the ceremony. And George IV was a controversial figure in himself. He acceded at a time when the monarchy had been divested of considerable powers, and he was quite a lavish figure. He liked to spend. And it was also a time when political radicalism was growing, so the early roots of socialism brewing. So the maligned figure of Queen Caroline, barred from the ceremony, became an unlikely champion of the radical press, a sort of symbol of all that was wrong with the rule of George IV. So the radical press actually sided with Queen Caroline over this coronation drama. And indeed, one of our newspapers pulled out here from the Beacon, which is an Edinburgh-based newspaper, actually published an account which they said was published with the Queen's sanction. And Heather has pointed out that the Scottish connection here with the coronation. Of course, the Stone of Scone was first used as coronation of Kenneth MacAlpin in 1840 in Scotland. It is still used, and will be used tomorrow. And there is some amazing folklore about that sort of biblical figures using that stone. I think there's a connection to Jacob in the Bible. It's such an important piece of Scottish history there. So, looking at the Beacon and the account that it gave of George IV's coronation, it details how the different persons at the door of the abbey were under orders to say that they did not know Her Majesty. So even if she turned up, and she did turn up, she would be turned away. So Queen Caroline turned up, in her royal carriage, quite obviously the Queen, and she was not allowed in. As I mentioned, George IV was quite a lavish personality. His coronation also drew criticism for its lavishness. And the Beacon in 1821, decides to draw attention to this, and it publishes a full account, and you can see this from this clipping here, a full account of the food that was eaten that day. I'm just going to read a short bit of this out, and this is just the hot dishes. So we've got 160 tureens of soup, 80 of turtle, 40 of rice, and 40 gram chili. This is it. Matthew has the source of wisdom. That is Matthew. The stone of destiny, aka the stone of Scone, supposedly the pillow Jacob rested on. Thank you. I knew there was a Jacob connection there somewhere. Back to our menu. 160 dishes of fish, comprising 80 of turbot, 40 of trout, 40 of salmon, 160 hot joints, including 80 of venison, 40 of roast beef with 3 barons, 40 of mutton and veal, 480 sauce boats, 240 of lobster, 120 butter, and 120 mint. And that wasn't it. There was cold dishes and a lot more. It was little wonder that his successor, his brother, the bluff sailor king, William IV, had to be persuaded by Parliament that it was not a colossal waste of money to indulge in a coronation. This is what I love. I found these. This is wonderful. These are invites to coronation. So the one on the left there is the actual invitation to the coronation of William IV and Queen Adelaide in September 1831, and then you can see the invite to the coronation of Queen Victoria. And I don't know if anybody's seen the invite to Charles's coronation tomorrow. It's changed. It's changed a lot, and they've become much more sort of ornate and symbolic as the years have gone on, and that sort of started really with the reign of Edward VII. And these were reproduced in the Illustrated London News in the run-up to the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. Victoria, lovely. Yeah, I like to, imagine sort of receiving one of these and being like, oh, I'm off to the ceremony. There's always something quite Bridgerton about this, which reminds me I will be watching the new series about Queen Charlotte. I think that's just launched this week. Ellie will tell me more. Onto another Queen Victoria, and Mine too, Matthew. So we're on to the coronation of Queen Victoria, and Kate and Ellie mentioned this yesterday. The coronation of the young Queen didn't go as planned, and the Archbishop of Canterbury actually nearly ended the ceremony early. He turned over 2 pages at a time. One of the elderly lords who was in attendance fell down a set of stairs, and the queen had to help him back up again. And the coronation ring was sort of forced onto her wrong finger, and it was all a bit of a disaster. And one peer is reputed to have noted down in his programme, I think in the event of another coronation, we really ought to have a rehearsal. And it would be, of course, a long, long time before another coronation would come around. Queen Victoria ruled for 64 years, then the longest reign in British history. So again, it's quite comparable with what we see today after Queen Elizabeth II's record-breaking reign. Edward VII succeeded his mother, Queen Victoria, and so much had changed in those 64 years, and especially, which is my focus, newspapers had changed. So we see by the time 1902 comes around, printing techniques have improved. We can mass printing, colour printing, all of that contributes to the birth of these wonderful coronation specials. And someone had an invitation here. Jane, I have a copy of Great Uncle Stanley's invitation to King George and Queen Mary's coronation. Wonderfully special. That's amazing. What a treasure to have. So, by 1902, we see these wonderfully glossy coronation specials beginning to be produced. And this is another one from 1902. Now, this one was actually printed in August, on the 14th of August. So this was after the coronation event had happened. So we actually see reproductions of the coronation filling this special. And this was sort of the first newspaper, the first time that the coronation had been depicted in such a way at the time, with such lavish illustrations. And it featured illustrations like this one here, which is the ceremony of recognition. And this is where the monarch is presented to the 4 sides of the abbey, and the congregation is asked if they are willing to do homage to their sovereign. So this is when things started to get slightly wild at the coronation of William the Conqueror. Thank you, Daphne. Thanks for joining us. See you off there. And so it was 4 times that you have to be presented round, but King Edward VII was only asked to do it once because he'd just been recovering from surgery. So Edward VII's reign wasn't to last too long. He was succeeded by his son, George V. And this particular coronation in 1911 stands out to me. 2 reasons. It revealed more about the modern nature of kingship, and also revealed a slightly more relatable face of the monarchy. And there was no sermon at the coronation of King Edward VII, sort of in keeping with his playboy persona. But there was at the coronation of George V, and the Archbishop of York preached on the Luke 22:27 text, "I am among you as he that serveth." So the sermon outlined how the king is set to be the leader of his people in the service of God and man. So this is like the ancient sense of noblesse oblige. So noblesse oblige, to borrow a quote from a different universe, is the idea that with great power comes great responsibility. Or, as an Illustrated London News commentator put it in 1937 on the eve of another coronation, the principle that those who have great privileges should bear great burdens. So a monarch, as well as ruling, must more importantly serve. And to that end, the monarch in 1911 promised to help and defend widows and orphans, restore the things that have gone to decay, maintain the things that are restored, punish and reform what is amiss, and confirm what is in good order. And as for the relatable element, this came from George V's children, who were quite young at the time of their father's coronation. And the Illustrated London News in June 1911 captured this particular moment, which had obviously caught the artist's eye. It shows the young Princess Mary accompanied by the Duke of York, who would become King George VI, greet her brother, the Prince of Wales, later Edward VIII. And the two siblings, Mary and Edward, they bow to each other. And there's a sense of friendly rapport. And this moment between the siblings caused sort of great interest. And I think people could imagine, that relatability of those family relationships. And in another sense, the monarchy had entered the age of celebrity. And Ellie found this wonderful picture yesterday. Just look at these tired crowds here from 1911. This is from the graphic, just waiting to catch a glimpse, and they've been up at dawn. And I believe there've been people queuing for days already to witness the coronation tomorrow. So that's a wonderful snap there. And the next king to be crowned wasn't the Prince of Wales. Edward VIII abdicated the throne in 1936, so it was his brother, the Duke of York, who succeeded and became the next king to be crowned. And again, what I find sort of remarkable throughout our newspapers is how the coronation created such a fervour and excitement in the press. And again, we see these really lavish coronation specials, which include illustrations like this one, which show the coronation service of King George VI. And then this wonderful photograph, again, an Ellie find, of the King and Queen appearing on the balcony at coronation night, on the balcony at Buckingham Palace there, the famous balcony, waving and acknowledging the crowds. And really, by 1937, as our commentator Arthur Bryant observed, the coronation had hardly changed in 1,000 years. He labels the coronation as the most extraordinary phenomenon, which has retained the identical rites and symbols that were first used at this beautiful ceremony centuries and centuries ago. But how would the coronation cope when it was flung into the middle of the 20th century? And the answer was quite admirably. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953 was the first to be fully televised and was one of the television events of the century. Adverts like this one from the Leamington Spa Courier encouraged people to buy television sets to watch the event. If you didn't have a television, you could always head to a neighbour's house, or I did find an advert for Butlins. So you were invited to go to Butlins, where you could watch the coronation on a large screen television. And I've also found reports of hospitals setting up televisions and town halls putting in televisions. So people who didn't have access to a television themselves were able to watch the event. And it's just so groundbreaking. It's like the veil has slipped in a way that this magic, this archaic service is suddenly before the eyes of the masses. It's just this wonderful technological revolution. And in all, a record-breaking 27 million people in the United Kingdom watched the coronation in 1953, and it's estimated that 277 million people watched the event globally. Now, the only part of the service not to be televised was the actual anointing of the monarch. This is the most sacred part of the ceremony. And this is going to, I believe, this is going to be the same tomorrow. So we're not actually going to be able to see that part. For Queen Elizabeth II, I've seen drawings of that particular event. So it's interesting. So it's still that little bit of magic and mystique which surrounds the throne there, that bond between the seen and the unseen, the monarch and the heavens. And just something I really found quite interesting, because he's my favourite, or not my favourite, but one of the members of monarchy that I'm most interested in, Duke of Windsor, the Edward VIII. So one of the millions of people to be watching that day was the Duke of Windsor in 1953, the king who was never crowned. And he is shown here by one of our newspapers, The Sphere, watching the coronation ceremony alongside his wife. And there's so much in this photograph. He's almost like grasping his throat, like, or his heart, like, what might have been there. Picture says 1,000 words. And what I think fundamentally about the coronation tomorrow and in 1953 is we see how it brought people together. And especially in 1953, it gave people a chance to come together after the trauma of war, the austerity of post-war Britain. 1953 rationing is still in place. There are still bomb craters. These are people who have lived through difficult times, and I think the coronation really represented an opportunity for people to come together, and we really see that in our newspapers. And sport for choice really here, including different snapshots from our newspapers of these street parties, the celebrations, towns coming together. So here we've got Shipley, Nantwich, and Manchester, and this fantastic one, another Ellie find. This is children's coronation party in Swinbrook Road, Kensington, and I know my mum participated in these coronation parties. I think she was in Southall, and she was sat waiting for the Queen to appear in her carriage at the bottom of the road. Of course, the coronation route didn't quite take in Southall, but you can imagine. So I just love the joy in these photographs, these people coming together, celebrating the national event. So if you are celebrating the coronation over the weekend, do enjoy, and have a browse in our newspapers collection to see if you can find out how your ancestors might have celebrated previous coronations, or perhaps even if your street had a street party. So if you're watching the coronation tomorrow, let's see what hints to the past you can pick out, any hints of the medieval pageantry that we've looked at. But thank you so much for joining us for this special Coronation Fridays live. Hope you all have a lovely weekend, and if you're in the UK, a lovely long weekend with that extra bank holiday. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.